So this talk is going to be split into two parts. The first part is going to be given by myself, and the second part by Luís. First, I'm going to be talking about some recent zero-knowledge developments. And when I say recent, I really mean like the past year. And after that, Luís is going to talk about how this is quite a challenge for us at ZKProof. So first, I'm going to start just by motivating zero knowledge a little bit, giving some applications outside of anonymous cryptocurrencies. I know that's very scary. Talk a bit about the speed at which it's evolving, and yeah, some recent advances. So I would say that there's quite a lot of applications which we're seeing startups and companies building zero knowledge in order to actually use. Some of the more fun ones I've sort of got in the slides here. Certainly one that's like quite cool is people have been trying to fight, well, fake news really, with images. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, if this image has been taken on this camera, then it should have a signature, like a digital signature that is like a hardware thing that you wouldn't be able to forge. But then if you want to actually like make edits to that photo, maybe you want to compress the size of it so that it actually fits in a news article or something like that. This is work of Dan Bonet, by the way. Then you would lose the signature. It would no longer verify with respect to the image you're actually showing people, but it would still be valid. And people have been there like, you could use SNARKs for this. You can. Okay, it's not so much the zero-knowledge part of the SNARK as the soundness part of the SNARK here, but you can prove that actually you've done only allowed edits to this real image, and then you would be able to, for example, compress in order to fit things in a smaller format. In terms of like the timeline of what process we've been going through in order to get zero knowledge to the place where it is today, obviously I haven't included everything that's important on this timeline, but I have included sort of some things which I think are pretty relevant, absolutely including the very first GMR paper, which actually invented zero knowledge as a concept back in 1989. And during the 90s, I would say there was more of an effort to define the notions that we were working with, sort of say, do we want public verifiability? Can we use a common reference string if we want to have something that's non-interactive? What is a PCP? People were like getting these notions, getting them ready, so to speak. In the 2000s, a lot of things were pairing-based. People sort of realized that pairings were amazing for cryptography, and that sort of really culminated in lots and lots of schemes. Probably one of the most important, I would say, being Grot10. Now, you wouldn't use this nowadays. It's really slow. But it is probably the first modern SNARK in the sense it's the first thing that was really, really tiny. This was then improved in the GDPR paper, where they came up with this quadratic span program, I believe it was at the time, which then moved on to quadratic arithmetic programs in R1CS. And this was the idea that you can use a trusted setup in order to put everything in a trusted setup in order to make verification time really small. Grot16 improved on this, made it faster. But after that, we started to think, OK, how can we not have pairings? How can we not have groups in the case of Fry? How can we not have trusted setup? And then only in 2019 did we, OK, recursion was a thing before 2019, but only in 2019 were people sort of getting serious about we can do this, we can do recursion. Then lookups sort of came onto the scene as well with the lookup work, and I would say that was pretty important. Custom constraints, that was a big one. Being able to not only be able to prove small things, but be able to prove sort of larger things in each time step. And in recent years, we've also seen sort of some folding works and some lookup works. One particular application I would like to highlight in some detail is one that's relevant to the Ethereum proof of stake protocol. And the reason I wanted to highlight this one is because I'm aware that Zcash sort of has some feelings about moving to proof of stake, so I sort of thought it might be quite an interesting one for you. One thing that we're currently doing in our protocol is we have these validators, and they're going to sign blocks when they think that they're valid. And then we want to make it so that we have all of the signatures for a valid block before, well, not all, but a majority of signatures before we consider it to be something that you could finalize on. And the way these signatures are communicated is done via a gossip protocol. The reason for this mostly being that gossip is kind of convenient in a setting where not every node knows who every other node is, and they can't communicate to everyone else in the network. Instead, they maybe are only connected to a few people in the network. In this kind of situation, I mean, what gossip is doing is it's saying, I'm going to select a random subset of people each time in order to send messages to, and eventually, if enough people are doing this in enough rounds, it will propagate to everybody, and this sort of suits our decentralized nature much more than something that would require, like broadcast, you'd need to know all of the public keys, for example. So in the first round, you send a few information to a few randomly chosen nodes. And in the second round, you send some information to a few different nodes. In order to make the amount of information that we're actually sending not too big in each round. We're not sending all of the signatures individually. Instead, we're aggregating them. So we have like one aggregate signature which you'd send in each round, as well as a bit field saying who's signed and who hasn't signed. So in the first round, validators have their own signature and not much else, which then means in the second round, if they want to be able to aggregate the signatures which they're receiving from other people, they're only going to be aggregating things that have one signing thing. And this is something which they can do very easily, so there's no real problem coming up here. The actual problem comes in the third round, where we want to aggregate again, but the signatures that we're using, VLS, has this property where you can't aggregate the same signature twice. Not if you only want to send a bit field of information. If you could send the whole field, that'd be fine, but then the information blows up in a big, big way. So where we're in a situation where we can't really aggregate the same signature twice, we can only aggregate signatures that aren't overlapping in what's already been aggregated. So in this particular example here, you would actually be in a situation where none of these aggregating parties could proceed at all with the information they're receiving, because all of them are overlapping in ways which wouldn't be convenient. This has quite an impact on the scalability of how many validators we can have sign in each round, if we want to be able to actually do things fast. So we're kind of in a situation where we can scale comfortably to sort of, I can't remember the precise number, but I'm going to say 256. But we would like to be able to scale to like 1 million. We'd like to be able to have it so that every single person signs in every single round in order to get something called single slot finality, which is a big buzzword. So do look it up if that makes no sense to you. If instead we could aggregate with overlaps, which is something that recursive zero-knowledge proofs could give you, then we would be in a situation where we could scale to, where we could genuinely have this overlapping thing going on, so we could scale to many more parties. And yeah, maybe there's ways to do this without zero-knowledge proofs, but we don't know of them. And we kind of know that, at least theoretically, zero-knowledge could do this. The example I gave was particularly relevant to recursion because you don't necessarily know the information that you're aggregating over, so you probably need to be doing a proof of a proof in some sense. It doesn't necessarily have to be a folding scheme. Actually, for this example, a folding scheme maybe isn't ideal because you don't really want to be sending the full witness in every round, which folding usually makes you do. So you might want to instead have like a different approach to recursion. The papers and reports and HackMDs and everything else that I'm posting on this slide are all posted within 2023, every last one of them. So we've got Sangria, which is a folding scheme for Plonk. We've got Protostar, which is also targeting Plonk, and I'll talk more about that one in a bit, so I'm not going to dwell on it. We also have Lurk, which is looking to use recursion. We know that the Polygon team are looking to use recursion in their SNARK prover. We have Goblin Plonk, which is looking at recursion again. One of these looks like I forgot to update it, but Hypernova is relevant. So what is a recursive SNARK? In case I've lost anyone where I'm saying folding recursion, 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 and you don't know. It's a SNARK of 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 a SNARK that some kind of statement is true. And how many SNARKs are in there is like kind of arbitrary. Probably the first one, which I would say was a recursive SNARK, which I would say was really, really relevant, was Halo 1. Halo 1 saw that we could do recursion without pairings, which is pretty big in the sense that it means we can have 2 cycles. So to explain, if you want to not have non-native field arithmetic inside your circuit, and if you want things to be fast, you kind of want to have your curves embed each other, be related to each other. So you prove one SNARK on one curve, and then the other SNARK on another curve, and then you keep switching between each curve. Technically, we do have cycles with pairings, but they're big. You have to go through 6 curves, I believe, and each of those curves is quite a lot bigger than if you're not worried about having cycles. And this was then formalized in being an accumulation scheme in a follow-up work by a different set of authors. Nova came a couple of years later, and really this was building on a theoretical work, I would say, by Benedict Bunz, amongst others, where they named it split accumulation. And really the key insight here is that even if the witness is big, the prover can still be very, very small, because you can just do simple random linear combinations and not worry about doing anything too complicated, and great things happen. I'm not going to say why it's simple, but it is really, really simple. Nova kind of took this word, split accumulation, and instead chose to use the word folding, which I think everyone largely agrees now is a much better name. I think it sort of is more intuitive about how it's like gradually folding two things together until you get something genuinely small. They also noticed that it's very important to be able to apply a SNARK at the end so that you have something small at the end. Okay, this year we have seen Hypernova, Protostar, and CCS, sorry. The CCS paper is more about a constraint system than a folding scheme, but the reason why I'm putting it on there is because it is relevant to Hypernova. Hypernova is targeting CCS. And the idea of this constraint system is it simultaneously captures R1CS and Plonkish and air all at the same time. Hypernova is avoiding cross terms using a sum check argument, I would say, is like their key technical insight. And by doing this, they're able to make things a lot faster than Nova was. Protostar is taking a different approach. It's not avoiding the cross terms. It's merely saying, if you have cross terms, then let's batch them all together at the end of the computation. And this is another way to make things really fast. Which is better out of Hypernova or Protostar? At the moment, I couldn't tell you. I would say they're early enough, they're recent enough, the implementations probably haven't been compared enough, at least by reports that I've seen, for me to go and say one is better than the other. The third and final sort of improvement that I want to talk about today is something called the Grumpkin curve. And this is moving away from the idea of curve cycles. Remember, like just 5 minutes ago, I was saying, oh, curve cycles are kind of really important if you want to be doing non-native field arithmetic in order to do recursion really fast. Grumpkin is kind of challenging that mentality, and it's saying that actually we've got really good at representing constraints nowadays. So why don't we just do the non-native field arithmetic? It's not that bad. And they make a fairly good case for it. So all of this is huge advances that we're seeing happening at a very, very quick rate. But I would still say that despite it happening at a very quick rate, education about these primitives and these new schemes and these new things that are coming out, it really, really matters, right? Because we're in a situation where zero knowledge is being used for applications that we think are important, but it's not being used for as many applications as it could be used for if we were to get the, if we were to I would say, challenge the perception about zero knowledge being like this mystical thing that only experts understand. Like, really, what we want to be doing is we want to be portraying it as a safe and practical tool that can be used in people's day-to-day lives. In order to do this, I would say we need to make it understandable in any way that we can. Also, if we have the education be tackled in such a way that we can target developers and academics and generalists and people from all kinds of different backgrounds with tailored resources, then what's going to happen is these people are now going to be able to actually talk and actually help each other and actually improve on each other's work, rather than be in sort of separate communities doing separate things. So it just helps the discussion and helps the rate of improvement. I'm now going to move over to Lewis, who's going to talk more about why education matters.
Thank you, Mary. So continuing this part of the talk, we want to go a bit beyond research papers and think more on a perspective of community, and maybe bring up the topics of education and standards. And really, the ZkProof initiative, which I believe the audience here would have heard of as of this point, is really the natural setting for this type of community discussion. So, but still continuing on this aspect of why education matters, let's, for example, consider the question of when should we recommend in society that ZKPs should be widely recommended as a best practice? Should it be right now, or should it only be in the future? Maybe two suggestions here of things to consider. Well, probably we should recommend it widely only when we're kind of sure that we can get ZKPs right. And we can get them right, not only the cryptographers, but whoever's going to implement them and whoever's going to use them. And here maybe we can consider standards as a checkpoint. And it turns out that we actually don't really have main standards for ZKPs. So maybe we still have to do that little step that will represent that we can already get something right, at least some kind of consensus. And also in terms of education, once we reflect on this, we think that it would be important for a good collective understanding to exist. And this collective understanding, again, would be much beyond cryptographers, and would include the people that make policies about zero-knowledge proofs, the people who implement them, the stakeholders that benefit from them. And so, just as a few examples here of items, there should be a good understanding of what security of a zero-knowledge proof is. And there's many technicalities that can differ what that security means. In the current days, talking about post-quantum is very popular. Should zero-knowledge proofs be post-quantum? A person who's going to benefit about zero-knowledge proofs, do they know about that currently? For example, there are these technicalities between a zero-knowledge proof being deniable or transferable. It's actually something very little talked about these days, and often we actually consider zero-knowledge proofs to be transferable, which basically often means that they are publicly verifiable. But actually, if we look at the original definitions of zero-knowledge proofs, the verifier is not even supposed to be able to transfer the proof to somebody else. So are people aware that these are distinctions? Privacy budget. Is it safe to actually give a zero-knowledge proof of a certain predicate? What if we make too many proofs about too many predicates? Are we actually leaking information? So maybe the zero in some cases is not really a zero, but a small epsilon. And also, there are many settings where people need auditability, and often there's this conflict between is zero knowledge actually enabling bad things to happen because things are being hidden, or might it actually be the opposite? Might we actually be being able to prove things that otherwise we would not prove because we don't want to share some information? Anyway, this is just some motivation on education. And so we think that to foster collective understanding, really education is important, both before and after ZKP standards are in place. And so the next slides are basically some notes about the ZkProof, just to give you a glimpse. So ZkProof is an effort that has been ongoing since 2018. A little snippet from the webpage says that it's a global movement to standardize and mainstream advanced cryptography by building a community-driven trust ecosystem, and selecting here three main aspects that have been promoted by ZkProof. So there have been annual workshops that essentially have been gathering hundreds, or at least usually more than 100 people in annual workshops. There's a body of reference material that has been emerging, and there's been working groups that have worked in the past. Many of them actually have, in the meantime, paused, but now we have a revived interest in making working groups be born again. So in terms of ZKProof reference material, the things we consider that are useful for education, so they're all listed in this webpage, docs.zkproof.org. ZKProof has a charter, an IP policy, and a code of conduct. There are various online resources, as are here exemplified in this right side banner. There's a ZKProof community reference, which in practice is a draft, but it's a main goal of the initiative. And there are other resources that are also envisioned and for which collaboration is very important. To give a glimpse of online resources that exist today, several of them in progress, for example, all ZKP-related presentations given at ZKProof workshops are available online. We've initiated this webpage of concrete ZKP schemes, which in practice have very few succinct descriptions, but kind of the vision is that we would have a single page that has hundreds of schemes, all of them with a nice template description that you can basically compare one against the other. In terms of educational resources, we've recently initiated a list of zero-knowledge proof resources that are external to ZKProof. It would be very nice to have further suggestions from the community on other links to add. And in terms of working groups, we have available the specifications that they have proposed. There are other things envisioned. For example, one that seems actually rather obvious, and it's quite interesting that is not in place, would be basically imagine a web page where you go there and you have, let's say, 200 conceivable applications of zero-knowledge proofs. Maybe 100 of them are real, and 100 others are things that are conceived but are not really real. But this would be the place to go for when somebody who's not a cryptographer and really is not so certain of what a zero-knowledge proof is, asks us, oh, can you tell me again what zero-knowledge proofs are good for? And this question is so recurrent. Like, why don't we have a resource where, go here and you'll see that this can be used for so many things. We want to build a glossary. We want to build a list of succinct explanations of various front ends and back ends, a list of explanations of arithmetization systems. And overall important as well, we want to achieve, which is something we think we don't have yet, an improved organization that allows people who reach this website of resources to really figure out where they should go first. In terms of vision, imagine, and again recalling this aspect of education, imagine somebody making any of these questions at whatever stage they are of their ZKProof, of their ZKP journey, or of their ZKP understanding journey. So, oh, I just heard about ZKProofs. The concept is so cool. What can I learn? Where can I learn more about this, or where should I start? Or, oh, okay, I know what ZKPs are, but what are they useful for? Or, oh, I just read a paper and I studied it really closely. Can I easily find about how other schemes compare? Or, oh, I heard something interesting was mentioned at a ZKProof workshop. Where can I find the details about that? Or maybe I'm even an expert on zero-knowledge proof, but are there community recommendations that should be followed, for example, security levels? And for each of these questions, we basically, I'm not going to read all the answers, but basically, we envision that each type of resource we have can be a good answer to these questions and say, go and check this particular resource on ZKProof website. We have a community reference that has progressed across time. It's really a draft. It currently has 4 chapters: security, paradigms, implementations, and applications. There's a lot to improve on it. Just as an example of content, in the last version we added a mind map of information theoretical systems, which are one of the components in building a concrete zero-knowledge proof system. And to each of the nodes in this mind map, you'll have a set of paragraphs in the actual community reference. Why should we care about the community reference also? It's not a paper with the newest technique. It's not a standard on its own, and it's not even finished. It's still a draft. Well, it has the potential to be what we can call a Schelling point. It's the place where anybody in the world at some point needs a reference about zero-knowledge proofs, what are they going to choose if they also don't know what's the most recent paper or there is something that is very specific? They might choose something that has been developed by the community and for the community, right? And so we envision the utility of this community reference, that it has the utility that actually brings together the community into a joint effort, finding even if only common terminology, interfaces, etc. And it's also useful for non-researchers and non-implementers. And so it could potentially be very useful for people who are not cryptographers and not researchers. And also the sheer fact that such a community reference would exist provides evidence that this is a credible technology, let's call it a technology, for people who are trying to decide, what is zero-knowledge proofs versus something else that I've just heard that might not have any support by the community. So basically, Community Reference 1.0 is a vision to be progressively achieved, and hopefully many of you in this room could help us do that. So in terms of things that are upcoming, stay tuned, because in this current revived version that we have of processes, we're going to put out a call for contributions for the community to help us out reach version 0.4. Also, ZkProof is reviving a process for standards and specifications. If you attend ZkProof 5.5, in particular, Mary is going to give an example of a process that is being revived, so we're quite excited about that. There are also external opportunities. For example, currently NIST has a call for threshold schemes that incorporates also within it a call for zero-knowledge proof schemes. And also in terms of visions, we believe that the specifications elaborated under ZkProof may then be submitted to other standards development organizations, and that might actually be a path towards wide standardization and widely recognized standards of zero-knowledge proofs. So, come participate with ZkProof. And having said that, I just want to show a slide that shows the new ZkProof structure that has just been discussed recently between several ZkProof members. And just to give a very brief historical remark, so ZkProof started in 2018, basically with a steering committee in the first workshop. Everything other than that was pretty informal. In 2019, there was the need to create an editors team to basically concentrate around this idea of creating a community reference. In 2023, we realized that it's really important to create different teams, both to enable members to focus better on what they're doing, but also to more easily open up room for external collaborators to collaborate. And so currently we have 5 teams: editors, standards, events, executive, and the steering committees as well. And as of this point, the public can enter in contact with any of these teams. So in summary, combining some of the insights from Mary and also from the second part of the presentation, zero-knowledge proofs, the space of zero-knowledge proof is very active in terms of research, but yet without main standards. The ZkProof effort aims to gather a community towards standardization, which is very closely connected to education. ZkProof has been developing community reference material that still needs to be thoroughly developed. And just because it's the topic of this presentation, education, including for non-experts, in our opinion, is essential for the zero-knowledge proof ecosystem. Thank you very much for your attention. We have some links here, and we're happy to receive questions. Shall we continue?
All right. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions, and then we also have a couple questions here, and then we can also open up questions to folks here. So the first question is, has ZKP been used outside the blockchain? Any mainstream use cases you're able to mention?
So one that I quite like is a use case around vulnerability disclosures. So currently, when you're like maybe a white hat hacker and you're trying to break into someone's system in order to say, look, there's a bug, you might want to improve on things, you might want to fix things in case someone who's actually malicious gets in. This is a process where you have to go through responsible disclosure. because if you actually reveal the bug so that people can verify that you're telling the truth, then anyone who knows that bug could actually do some quite bad damage, potentially. So one thing that I know that the DARPA protocol has been working on is they've been looking at, can you use zero knowledge in order to convince somebody that actually you genuinely do know that there is a vulnerability in this code base without necessarily revealing what that vulnerability is to the world. And this would allow you to not even have to go through responsible, well, probably you still have to go through responsible disclosure, but it could change the process entirely.
Just as an additional quick example, zero-knowledge proofs are also an important building block of cryptography, and so they can be used to facilitate many other schemes. They've been successfully used, for example, to enable some of the recent proposals for post-quantum signature schemes. And in essence, often a signature scheme is basically zero-knowledge proof of a secret key. Yeah, so that's another example.
Great. I'll ask actually one more question, and then I think we're out of time. So I think for me, as someone who appreciates zero knowledge and does signature schemes, but not generalized zero knowledge, it's somewhat hard to follow progress because you have schemes with different names, and then sometimes we're talking about accumulation or polynomial commitments, or and it's just like very hard to follow like what is progress. And I think there's been some effort made for modularizing what components go into zero knowledge. And like Luís, you were talking about front ends and back ends, which like that's also new to me. So I guess I'm curious, like how are you sort of arriving on what building blocks contribute to a zero knowledge scheme?
Actually, this is has happened somewhat organically, I would say. I think we know what the building blocks are, and I think how we know what they are I don't think it's an area of contention. I think you sort of present these are the building blocks, and you hear someone else presenting these are the building blocks, and largely it's the same. I don't know how that happened.
I agree. It's not like we try to reach something. It's already there when we think about it.
Okay.
But definitely modularity is something that is very relevant to help understand how schemes arrive. And even I was showing that diagram of information theoretical schemes. That's already an example where we're modularizing kind of an information theoretical layer, where then you say, you can think about this in an information theoretical way, and then you can apply a compiler that makes it the actual real scheme. And in the meantime, sometimes we identify other modules like a polynomial commitment or something like that. And it does really help navigate the space, or at least conceptually understand how so many schemes exist, but often they kind of follow some kind of template.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have. So thank Mary and Luís.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.